on December 7th, 1941, the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor, and that begins in earnest American involvement in World War II, and that begins a new era in the history of the Disney Company. They are the only Hollywood studio in American history to be occupied by the U.S. military. At some point, there are more than 700 American troops that come to Burbank Studios on order of the U.S. Army, and they are protecting a nearby Lockheed aircraft plant from alleged Japanese invasion. So they have a mission there, and they take over the Burbank Studios. They convert it into a barracks. There are troops everywhere. And Disney is kind of conscripted into the war, whether he likes it or not. And this begins the era that I think a lot of people know about or know something about, which is that the Disney Company begins to produce films and other material that support the U.S. government in its effort to win World War II. So this era is like Disney literally kind of drafted into the war. And there's a lot of talk of like Disney's hyper nationalism and them kind of becoming the tool of propaganda for the state, and that's certainly true. But I want to emphasize that part of this is because Disney had expanded their operations to a point where they had basically overextended themselves in terms of how much money they were making and how much how much their product was worth, and they were basically going to go bankrupt. And the Disney Corporation ended up saving itself by producing government films that we'll look at here in a second, and other pieces of material that supported the war effort because they got massive contracts from the U.S. government. Now, the scale of this is kind of unbelievable because by 1943, 90% of Disney's production was production for the U.S. government. So it's not unlike it's not wrong to say that Disney is sort of taken over by the U.S. government during this moment, and they kind of allow themselves to do it to save themselves. And the result is this sort of remarkable output of material, films produced by the top animators in the world, who were sort of at the top of their game coming off of these tremendous films, honestly, like Dumbo and Snow White, etc. And all their efforts and talents are put to use producing propaganda for the U.S. government. So you can see some of that here, and let's look at a few pieces of this. You see like the Disney characters like Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck drafted into the war literally, and they become ubiquitous in American life. They would have been the image that you see here of all the Disney characters sort of wearing U.S. military uniforms, marching gladly off into war. They're kind of the face of the war for the American public and for people within the American military. That's especially true in the U.S. Air Force, where you have this nose art on the front of all of these planes with militarized images of Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse and all the others. There's a massive archive of this stuff online that you can check out. It's sort of I think a nostalgia trap for a lot of people, honestly, who look back at this era fondly. And there's something, I don't know, there's something so demonic in some ways about thinking about the smiling face of Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck on these instruments of mass murder. But there you have it. We sort of like grafted these popular images onto the war machines, and that's something I think we're thinking about when we're thinking about Disney's legacy and its sort of place in American culture all the way to today. So they're supporting the military effort with all of these. There's Goofy as an aircraft mechanic. They're supporting the war effort with all of these images, and it's images on items within the American military. There are comic books for children that explain the war to them in sort of children's terms. There are all sorts of bits of ephemera, material culture, like mugs, hats, T-shirts, things like that sort of communicate the war or some bit of the war with a Disney character. There's even these United States Treasury war bonds that have all of the Disney characters printed around them as you sort of sign your wages over to the U.S. government for building more weapons. So, the Disney face on the military industrial complex is something that's really important to understand ideologically. But it's also worth thinking about that, Walt Disney is sort of digging himself out of a hole by embracing this hyper nationalistic use of his characters.